Hello, everyone, and welcome to our engineer interview with Vincent. My name is Scott, and I'm your host for today. Before we start, I just want to say a massive thank you for signing up to this year's competition. For those of you who don't know, this is the Leaders Award competition, where we ask the question, if you were an engineer, what would you do? Pupils from the ages of 3 to 19 anywhere in the UK can join before being tasked with identifying a problem in the world around them and coming up with a solution for that problem. Now, during these interviews, we're going to be speaking with people who work on loads of different projects, all of them showing the wonderful, interesting, and exciting things that happen when you work in engineering. Now, we're going to start with a presentation from Vincent, where we learn all about brain engineering, before we open it up to the audience for questions. If you do have a question, please type it in the chat box along with your name and school, and I can read them out in the Q&A. But that's everything from me. We're now going to go to Vincent, who's going to start his presentation.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vincent, and I'm just going to share my screen and spend about 10 minutes telling you what I do before I answer your questions. So as I said, my name is Vincent Giampietro. I'm an academic at King's College London. So what an academic is, so I work in a university. So it's a university and a hospital where I work. And I do research and I teach. And in my day-to-day job, really, me and my colleagues, we're trying to understand how the brain works, what happens when things go wrong in your brain, and what can we do about it. Practically, I trained initially in biomedical engineering. So it is the engineering which is anything to do with the medical domain, really. And after a while, when you do biomedical engineering, you have to specialize. And for me, there was no choice, really. I wanted to work with the brain because the brain is like, the best organ we have. I thought it's the best one to study. I didn't want to spend my life doing, engineering of your arm, of your leg or something. I thought this was not that interesting, but the brain was really, really interesting. So all of us who do that kind of work, regardless of what we've done before, we're calling ourselves neuroscientists. I mean, some people do study neuroscience in university, but, we work all together. So it's, neuroscientists, engineers, psychologists, and we all do brain research all together, really. And what we focus on is everything to do with mental health. So, we can look at what, physically go wrong in your brain, but anything else as well. Anything you can think about with your brain, either the healthy brain, we study how your brain changes when you grow up, but we look a lot in, what's different between the brain of people who are healthy and the brains of people who may have some neurological conditions, some psychiatric conditions, or people who just are different, like neurodiverse people. We try to see what's different in the brain. So there's lots of different scales you can study the brain at, really. Some of my colleagues are working with brain cells. So here you can see some neurons in a dish, and you can see they're trying to connect. If you look at this little, I don't know if you can see my mouse, this little guy at the top trying to connect with the others. So I'm not doing this. I'm not looking at neurons. So the kind of scientists who do this would be the ones in the labs with their white coats, looking at microscopes, your typical stereotype scientist, if you want. Some of my colleagues, this is my colleague Claire, are looking at real brains. So she's holding a brain in her hand. So this is a real person's brains. We have people who are donating their brain after they die. They donate their brain for research. So I'm not doing any of this. I don't want to touch a brain, a real brain. What I'm doing in my job, I'm using machines. Like here, it's an MRI scanner. I don't know if some of you who are listening to me, you may be familiar. You may have had an MRI scan yourself for one reason or another, or one of your family members may have an MRI scan. So we're using the same scanners which are installed in the hospitals. We're using them to do research. And this is a picture, a photo from one of the scanners downstairs in the building where I'm sitting now. And with these scanners, we can take photos and films of what's happening in your head. And here you can see some examples. So the one on the top left is the typical scans that the doctors would use to see what's wrong in someone's brain. So if I was to stop it, so it doesn't want to stop. I like to stop it always about here. This one, I like this one. It looks really, really strange, doesn't it? So here we're looking at someone from the top. Okay. You can see the eyes at the front. You can see the nose. That's the cartilage inside your nose. You can see some squiggly thing here. I don't know how it looks like on your screen, but you can see some squiggly thing inside your ears, beside your cochlea. But more interesting for me, I'm not really looking at these things. I'm really looking at the brain. And you can see the brain here. You've got different colors that represent different types of tissue. So you have the whiter bits. You see the white ribbon around. This is what's called the cortex in your brain. This is where most of the neurons are. This is where the thinking happens, if you want, on the edges. The darker bits in the middle, this is what we call, so what's around the brain, we call this the gray matter. This is where the neurons are. What's in the middle, we call this the white matter, which is mostly just the connections between all the different parts of the brain. And this really bright thing in the middle is some liquid, some fluid inside your brain in the ventricles. So the doctors would look at this and they would try to diagnose something. For research purposes, we use the same images, but then we would look at how the brain is different in terms of brain anatomy, for example, between yourselves listening to me and your baby brothers and sisters. We could do this, we can scan babies and we could see what's different in their brain, which structure of the brain has not yet matured. We wouldn't be able to see it in a baby's brain, for example, or we could look at, your grandparents or your great-grandparents, or as I said earlier, we can look at people who have different brain disorders as well, trying to see what's different in their brain anatomy. The one you can see top right here we're looking at the brain rotating from the side, and we're seeing the blood. This represents the blood, your blood vessels and your blood arteries, in your brain. And these two at the bottom, with some sort of like spaghetti mesh there, represents the connections. Do you remember I was talking about this white matter, which is all the connections between the regions of the brain, and we can create some really beautiful maps of all these connections in the brain. And again, the doctors would be using this, for example, to prepare for surgery, to know where, when the brain surgeons are going to go inside the brain, they need to make sure they avoid some specific region, the regions which, for example, which is responsible for language, or the regions which are responsible for your movement. So the surgeons have to try to avoid these regions, and they're using all of this imaging information to try to plan how they're going to go in. So that's how we look at, these were different ways of using this MRI scanner to look at brain anatomy. Most of my research involve a different type of images we can get from the same scanner. I want to see what's going on in your brain when you're thinking, or when you're doing some experiments, when you're learning, or when you're trying to remember something. That's what I want to do. So basically, we're taking pictures of your brain. So every second, or every half a second, we take a snapshot of your brain activity. And then we produce these kind of images. So here we're looking at someone from the back. Okay, that's the back of the brain. And most of the back of our brain actually is our visual cortex, because vision is our primary sense. And the whole back of the brain deals with vision. I mean, it's like the biggest chunk of the brain really is to do with vision. And depending on what you're looking at, different parts of your brain will be what we call activated. They will be lighting up, which they will be involved in doing this task. You can see here, when you're looking at just like a checkerboard, when you just look at something random, it's like the center bits of your back of the brain. This is the bit of the brain which is directly connected to your eyes. Okay, the signal from your eyes comes straight to the back of the brain, to this what we call a primary visual cortex. And then after that, depending on what you're looking at, like this sort of animal shape, different part, the signal comes from the back of the brain to other parts of the brain. Our brain is really, really super specialized. So we have parts of the brain dealing with moving things, black and white versus color, faces. We can recognize we have different small parts of the brain that just responds when it's looking at faces. So that's great, all of this. This is what we can do with all this equipment. So what do engineers do? What do I do and my colleagues do, engineers working in neuroimaging? Well, as you can expect, the first thing engineers do is we build the machines. And the next generation, we're working on developing the next generation of brain scanners. we build as well all the equipment we need to do the experiments. These are like different button boxes, joysticks. I mean, whatever the researchers want to do, we can build it for them. And of course, most of us are also writing computer programs. So we're just writing code to analyze all the data coming, because there's a lot of data coming from these brain scanners. So we are just writing the software to analyze all these data and the software to run all the experiments as well. So I'm showing you some example of experiments here. This is an experiment top left, the one that is moving now. Is you are dropped in this landscape. You have to remember where you are by looking around. And then 20 minutes later, we drop you somewhere else in that landscape and you have to move to your original position. So this is testing your spatial memory in 3 dimensions. The one on top right, here you're just following a target. So you would have a joystick in your hand, like a controller, game controller, and you just have to follow the numbers in order, in reverse order, depending on the experiment. This may look really easy to you, but for somebody who has any kind of cognitive problems or somebody who has a movement problem, they have a disorder where they can't move properly, this would be really hard for them. The one at the bottom left is to do different kind of experiment. Here we're looking at what people are buying. It's a field called neuroeconomics. We're using neuroscience to understand what people are doing, like buying in this case. So we can see their eyes at the top. So we do an eye tracking, so we can see where they're looking at, which is this little cross that is moving. And we're just doing some experiments on this. So this mixes psychology and neuroscience. And the one, finally, bottom right is one of the experiments I did for a study. So this is a game where there's no controller. You're controlling this little spaceman with your brain. Basically, we're trying to teach you to increase or decrease brain activity in specific regions of the brain without any controller. We're trying to teach you to do this so that this will have some impact after that on your behavior. So that's it. This was just a really, really quick, I guess, review of what we do in neuroimaging. There's many more types of equipment we use, many more types of experiments we do on everybody from babies, or even before babies are born. We can already do experiments on them, all the way to to the elderly. So that's my presentation.
Well, Vincent, thank you so much for that. And I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. So remember, if anybody out there does have a question, please type it in the chat box for us to ask Vincent. But I have the first question. I didn't know before meeting you that a brain engineer was even a job. So what inspired you to want to work with the brain when you were younger?
I mean, sorry, I should specify, brain engineer is just the term I use for today. I mean, officially, we're not called, I mean, in terms of engineers, interestingly, most of the people I work with would be like biomedical engineering, would be electrical engineering, electronic engineering, or computer scientist. So it's all types of engineering, a lot of types. And there's a lot of chemistry as well in what we do. So we have chemical engineers. So basically, in a way, any type of engineering is good for what we do. Sorry, Scott, to go back to your question, what was it? I forgot.
What inspired you to want to work with the brain?
To work in this, because I've always found this fascinating. So nobody in my family had done medicine or had done anything to that, or engineering. I was the first one in my family to go to university. And it's just, I guess, in France, so I'm French, as you can guess from my accent. And in France, we all do in school, we have no choice. We have to do philosophy for A-level. It's international baccalaureate. And that started really my interest for the brain, all these philosophy things we were learning. And then naturally, I guess I fell in when I did my engineering. I still kept my interest in philosophy. And this is why I decided, yeah, there's one thing I want to try to understand is the brain. And what's great is the more we know, the less we know. There's been so many over my career, there's been so much progress done, but every time we answer one question, we have 10 more.
Oh, wow. In fact, so this idea of sort of like psychology and philosophy got you interested, but Elsie, year 6 in Bill Key in Gateshead, wants to know, what did you then have to go and study in order to get the job you do today?
Yes, I mean, we work in big multidisciplinary teams. So in a way, I was saying earlier, all types of engineering is good, but not just engineering. I work on these research projects. We work with, of course, doctors. We would have neurologists or psychiatrists mostly in our case, but we have psychologists, we have nurses, we have engineers, we have mathematicians, we have software programmers, we have everybody basically. And again, depending on the project, you may have some specifics. Sometimes we work with physios, we work with dentists, depending on the research we're doing.
Wow, so it really is. There's so many people that are involved in it, because I guess the brain is involved with everything that we do.
Exactly.
We've got this question in from Billy Rice, who asks, what's the most fascinating part of the brain to work with?
That's interesting. I've worked on lots of parts of the brain. I mean, I'm really, it's not what I work on, but it's just the vision. Just this, what I was telling you earlier, the fact that our brain is so specialized for vision. We have all these different parts of the brain for different types of things we can see. That's quite fascinating, I think.
So I was amazed that such a big part of the brain deals with vision. So does that mean that somebody who's visually impaired or perhaps blind, does that mean that their brain operates differently, or does it still have some interaction?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we've done a lot of research on this, on more in my university, more on deafness rather than blindness. But yes, the brain is organized differently, but some of the underlying engineering, I guess, is similar. For example, we've done lots of studies on people doing lip reading, and they activate the same part of the brain as hearing people do when they're listening to something. But for them, these parts of the brains are activated when they are lip reading, for example.
That is really interesting. Oh,
so the
thank
brain
you, Vincent.
reorganizes itself, but you don't need to be that. Even just within a few hours, we do experiments where if you just go, put someone in the dark for a few hours, with just something around your eyes, you can't see anything. Already within a few hours, your brain is reorganizing to deal with that.
Wow,
it's
that's
really,
amazing.
really flexible.
So we've got another question here from BFC Cornwall, which is interesting. They ask, with ultra-processed food addictions being in the brain, is there a possibility to reverse the addiction?
That's interesting. So there is a whole, I'm just pointing this way where you can see there's a whole department of addiction down there. I don't think they do food addiction, but they deal with other types of addiction. I would say yes, anyway, because most of addictions can be treated. It's really difficult for the person, of course, but I think this is more. I don't think the neuroscience has a big part to play in this. This is more on the psychology side, I would say, than the neuroscience. But what we can do is we can see which parts of the brain are being involved in this specific addiction, because it could be slightly different from other addictions. And because we know which part of the brain is involved, we know how to target it better. We know what medications target this region of the brain, for example. So this is how the new imaging can come in to help treatment.
Wow. So as I say, we've got loads of questions. And one of the things that you said at the start of your presentation was around the sort of how different people and how understanding mental health and looking at people's brains and how that operates. We've got a question here from Rebecca, who asks, what does ADHD look like in a brain?
So that's interesting. I've done a lot of research on ADHD. So we do a lot of neurodiversity research in general, where to try to understand how the brains are different, because it's just a different way of thinking if you're neurodiverse. And we try, and of course we are in a neurotypical world, but so neurodiverse people have to adapt, but we're trying to see what's different. It's different brain networks are involved. I've had a PhD student. We're now doing a project looking at curiosity in ADHD, specifically hyper-curiosity. The fact that if you have ADHD, you tend to be hyper-focused and you're really, really curious. And it's something we can measure, the fact that you are more curious, more creative, for example, if you have ADHD. And that's something we're studying right now.
That is really interesting. Thank you for the question. So as I say, we've got more questions. We've got two people asked similar thing, but this one comes from Brooke at Newstead Green. How long did you have to study to get to this job you're in now?
Yep. So what I did, well, okay, I'm going to, because I studied partly in France. So let's say I was in the UK. So you would need to do, well, it really depends because we do have undergraduate students. So they're doing their first 3 years in university, doing in neuroscience or psychology or a combination of both, or doing something computational. And they're doing projects already. They're doing, projects with us as staff. They're doing their research projects with us. But if you wanted to start doing your own research, you would do this for your PhD. So you would spend three years in university to get your degree, your bachelor degree. Then most people would do a master's after that. And after that, you could do a PhD to become a doctor, not a medical doctor, but a doctor to be able to do research. So most people would do their first research, their own research during their PhD, which would usually come in 4 years after university, once you've started university.
Wow, so there's a bit of a pathway for anybody interested.
But it never stops. You never stop learning anyway. So
we've got some more questions about how certain things affect the brain. This one comes from Layla. How does dyslexia affect your brain?
So it's similar to ADHD in a way. We're doing that kind of research at the moment, trying to understand. So we're doing lots of research on university students because it's easier for us than school students, trying to understand, depending on your neurodiversity, if you're dyslexic or if you are autistic or if you have ADHD, what type of teaching is best for you, what type of assessment, are you better doing exams? Are you better to do presentations, or would a podcast be better for you? We're trying to understand all this research. So the brain is different. So it's different brain networks are involved in doing different tasks, slightly different.
Interesting. So, as I say, we've still got time for questions. So if anyone's sitting on there, please send them in. This one comes from Rose at Bill Key. What was your favorite subject when you were in school?
Depending on the age, I guess. But interestingly, I wasn't that good at maths in school. I didn't do well in my maths, GCSE A levels, and somehow when I went to university, I loved it. It was taught differently, and it was different. It was more applied, and suddenly math became my favorite. Math and physics became my favorite topics out of nowhere, I would say. Before that, it was more, I guess, biology. I really like biology.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, I guess, working with the human body. We've got questions coming from people at James Brindley want to know, what do you enjoy most about your job?
It's different all the time. I mean, we do so many different things. You could be like, just before talking to you, I was teaching medical students, and then this afternoon, I'm going to go in the meetings to prepare the next research we're going to do. I mean, it's mostly good, of course. Your teachers will agree. There's things like marking, which we're not really looking forward when you have 200, coursework to mark and things like this. But I think that's what I really like, that it's always different. It's rewarding because we are, at the end of the day, we're trying to help people. If we understand better what's happening in the brain, I mean, I cannot claim that any of my work has led to a cure, but I hope that it helped along the way to try to find new treatments as well.
Yeah, it might not lead to a cure, but at least to a better understanding, I guess, and then that helps. We've got this question in from the Year 5 class at Newstead Green. They want to know, how long does it take to build one of the machines that you use?
Oh, that's interesting, building the machines. I mean, you will like this one. A lot of the time, we don't build them from scratch, as in we've just upgraded one downstairs to a brand new top of the range MRI scanner. But with most of it, we've kept the old one. We've just ripped off all the electronics, reinstalled everything. So we've kept a lot of the old equipment. So it's really interesting. I don't know how long it takes to build, but I know once we've got it, like once we have a new scanner, it could be 6 months before we start using it. By the time they replace it, we have to upgrade. You can't see it outside, but they spend months upgrading the electricity, for example. These new scanners need a lot more electrical current, and we did not have enough power to run these new scanners here. So we had to dig the road. I mean, it takes months and months and months to prepare things. And then once we get the scanner, it could be a month or two. First, whoever sells us the scanner, they do all their testing, which can take sometimes a month. And then we do all the testing. in a way, we say we're not paying everything. We give you half the money, and only after we've tested everything, we give you the other half, if you want. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but there's a lot of testing going on. So it's hard to put an exact, figure in that, but it takes a long time anyway.
Yeah, and it's not just the case of plugging it in and turning it on, and which makes
No, but we
sense.
do have, but that's for another conversation. We now have a new gen. We've been working with a company in the US to build portable MRI scanners. They look like
Wow.
big bins. Or those of you who watch Doctor Who, like they look like Daleks, like this kind of round things, and they're mobile and they're cheaper and they can be moved around and they can be plugged into the wall, into a normal socket. So that's another exciting thing. The technology is changing all the time, and I'm in the middle of it, which is exciting.
And are these the same machines that they have in hospitals?
So the ones we use for research are exactly the same ones we use in hospitals. That's why there's so much research, studying the brain using MRI scanners, because they're just there, basically. And we're hoping that soon the portable ones will be delivered everywhere as well.
Wow. So we've got time for a few more questions. If you are sitting on, please send them in. This one comes from Layla. It says, "Can you tell how intelligent someone is by looking at a scan of their brain?"
No, that's the answer. Another thing we can't do is we can't say if boys are smarter than girls or any kind of things like this, which I know is questions I've got sometimes. No, you can't really. I mean, intelligence in itself is not something that can be measured easily. Anyway, there's a lot of controversy. A lot of scientists are fighting to try to define even what intelligence means and how you would measure it. Anyway.
And we've just got another question that's coming from Leila as well. It's interesting. So, what happens to your brain when you have a seizure?
Okay, well, there's different types of seizure. You may be talking about epileptic seizure, I guess. So if you have epilepsy, what's happening in your brain is, well, basically, it's something which is not supposed to happen. Your brain suddenly starts to, all of these different brain networks, they all operate independently. And sometimes when you have a brain seizure, they all start to synchronize together. And then that means that you can't do anything because your whole brain gets activated, if you want, in a way. All these different networks, which are usually doing their things in their corner, they start to synchronize. I mean, this is only one type. There's different things that can happen, but that's one type of seizures. So one of the things we've been trying to do, or some of my colleagues that are doing, is we're trying to implant things in your brain, little computer chip, but when the computer chip detects that the brain is starting to synchronize in a way that it shouldn't, just sends a little zap, a little bit of electricity to desynchronize everything, to try to prevent the seizure from coming.
Wow, that sounds like something out of sci-fi. That's really cool.
It does. Yes.
So this question's in from Billy, and Billy wants to know, have you ever found out about any parts of the brain that we did not know about?
I mean, not personally, but funnily enough, some of my colleagues did. When they, for hundreds of years, people have been dissecting bodies and dissecting the brain, in this case, to try to find how the brain works and how the different parts of the brain are connected to each other. But when we now use this like spaghetti thing I was showing you earlier to try to map all the connections in the brain, people have found new connections that when people were doing the dissection manually, they were not able to see for various reasons, which I'm not going to go into today. But by using computer-based and 3D representation of these connections, we've been able to find new connections. So not really new parts of the brain, but new connections between existing parts of the brain. But I know that in anatomy in general, in medicine, they keep finding new organs. They keep finding new organs in our bodies that they didn't know existed. This I find amazing.
I didn't know that either. Yeah, that is amazing. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. This is a question from Becca, which I really like. What would your dream accomplishments be in this job? If there's something that you've always desperately wanted to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. Well, I think what's something I'm most proud of in a way is training students, training the next generation of doctors and of scientists. So my accomplishment would be that, it's clearly, I think most of us would say the same, that some of the work we do would help to lead to a cure for some things like, but we do spend a lot of time working on like Alzheimer's disease because we have some of these brain problems. I don't know if you know about Alzheimer's disease, but it's something that would your grandparents or your great grandparents may suffering for some form of dementia you have when you get older. And there's nothing you can do. You can't cure it. You can slow it down, but you can't cure it. And if we could help with this, try to find a cure for some of these disorders that we can't cure at the moment, that would be great. But again, I would come in from the engineering side, so it would be a big team effort working all together.
So, but just looking at the time, I think that is a fitting point to bring this interview to an end. So I would just like to say thank you to everyone for joining us, but a special thanks to Vincent for speaking with us today and inspiring all the engineers in the making out there, because now it is your turn to come up with your own engineering ideas. Remember, you're looking to identify a problem in the world around you and come up with a creative solution to that problem. After that, draw your idea down, write a letter telling us all about it and send it in to Primary Engineer. But one more time, I want to say a special thanks to Vincent. And remember, if you were an engineer, what would you do?